विश्वंदर्पण दृश्यमान नगरी तुल्यन्निजान्तर्गतं पश्यन्नात्मनि मायया बहिर्वोद्भूतं यथा निद्रया यत् साक्षात् कुरुते प्रबोधसमये स्वात्मानमेवाद्वयं तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नम इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये। ॐ नारायणं पद्मभुवं वसिष्ठं शक्तिं च तत्पुत्रपराशरं च व्यासं शुकं गौडपदं महान्तं गोविन्दयोगीन्द्रमथास्य शिष्यं श्रीशङ्कराचार्यमथास्य पद्म पादं च हस्तामलकं च शिष्यं तन्तोटकं वातिककारमन्यान् अस्मद्गुरून् सन्ततमानतोऽस्मि। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः। परब्रह्मनिष्ठं स्वतो धर्मनिष्ठम् अहिंसैकनिष्ठं स्वशिष्यैः सुजुष्टं यतीनां वरिष्ठं गुरूणां गरिष्ठं दयानन्दरूपं मदाचार्यमीडे। नमः श्रीपरमार्थाय संसाराध्यासनाशिने श्रोत्रियब्रह्मनिष्ठाय तस्मै ब्रह्मविदे नमः। सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्। ॐ I welcome you all to the 13th class, the Fundamentals of Vedanta series. We have been looking into the question of how an adhikari becomes an adhikari. And we said that the adhikari has to meet three criteria. First of all, the adhikari should be a mumukshuhu. Secondly, the adhikari must be a jigyasuhu. And thirdly, the adhikari must have certain qualifications of the mind, chitta shuddhihi, a certain preparedness of the mind. So in order to answer the question of how an adhikari becomes an adhikari, we have to answer these three questions. How an adhikari becomes a mumukshuhu, how an adhikari becomes a jigyasuhu, and how an adhikari gains this chitta shuddhi. So the first two questions we answered in the classes so far. The last class, we finished answering the second question of how an adhikari becomes a jigyasuhu. I will summarize the development so far. How does the adhikari become a mumukshuhu? We said that the adhikari becomes a mumukshuhu by discovering the problem of samsaraha. And what is this problem of samsaraha that the adhikari discovers? The problem of samsaraha is the discovery that the struggle to gain purnatvam out of the first three purusharthas is never ending. It is futile. And what kind of a person discovers this problem of samsaraha? It is someone who has gone through karma yoga. Karma yoga is right action with right attitude. A person who is committed to dharma and one who adopts these attitudes of Ishwararpana buddhi and prasada buddhi. Such a person neutralizes the ragas and dveshas. And the neutralization of the ragas and dveshas leads to a learning mind, a non-reacting mind. And such a mind is then able to see the doshas in the first three Purusharthas. And what are the doshas that he discovers? What are the defects that he discovers? We said there are three defects. Dukkha Mishritatvam, that all of the accomplishments in these first three Purusharthas are mixed with sorrow. Atriptikaratvam, that they leave me apurnaha. And bandhakatvam, that they make me more and more dependent on things in the world. And such a person realizes that depending on the world is not a good idea because the world is unreliable, unpredictable, unsustainable. We recall the cardboard chair example that Swamiji gives. A cardboard chair is just good for decorating, for seeing it. But if we try to lean on it, if we try to sit on it, it's a problem. Similarly, this person realizes that in this unpredictable, unsustainable, unreliable world, if I try to lean on it for my peace, security, and happiness, it's a bad idea. So this person now comes to a point where he asks that I have tried all of this. Is there something else that can give me this Purnatvam that I am seeking? And at that point, the Veda Purva tells him that I have done whatever I can. I have given you Arthaha, I have given you Kamaha, I have given you Dharmaha. But what you are now asking for, I cannot give you. But by bringing you to this point where you are asking this question, I have done my job. And now, in order for you to gain what you are asking for, you have to approach Vedanta. So we saw this pariksha lokan karmachitan brahmana nirvedam ayat nasti akrita kritena tad vijnanatham sa gurum eva abhigachet samitpanihi shrotriyam brahmanishtam. So such a person becomes a mumukshu. And we said that this mumukshutvam is not a zero or one thing. It is more of a spectrum. And there are manda mumukshu, there is manda mumukshu, madhyama mumukshu, and tivra mumukshu, with varying degrees of mumukshutva, who are seeking moksha with varying degrees of desperation. So such a person, all of these mumukshus, wherever they be in the spectrum, they are all eligible to approach Vedanta. So now we come to the second question of how this person becomes a jigyasuhu. And a jigyasuhu is somebody who sees the indispensable connection between the study of Vedanta and the benefit, which is the Purnatvam. So how does this person now become a jigyasuhu? We said that when this person approaches Vedanta and asks, what do I do to gain this Purnatvam? Vedanta tells him that you are asking the wrong question. And Vedanta drops a bombshell, saying that you cannot gain this Purnatvam. It cannot be attained. And Vedanta explains that this Purnatvam need not be attained. And why does it? Why is it so? Why doesn't it need to be attained? Because it is your very nature. And this is something that is very hard to even think about. Because the whole life this person has been struggling for Purnatvam, assuming I am a Purna. So this is a very, this is a very radical statement, bordering on the ridiculous, or even ridiculous, we can say. It sounds so ridiculous. Vedanta declares this. Vedanta Dindimaha, it is a drum beat of Vedanta. And to explain this, Vedanta gives the 10th man story. The 10th man was already the 10th man. But the 10th man was seeking for the 10th man. A very strange situation. And all of this happened because the 10th man was ignorant of his own status of being the 10th. Vedanta says that the entire problem is ignorance. And just like if the 10th man continues to seek the 10th man, he is going down a completely wrong track where he'll never find the 10th man. Similarly, Vedanta says if you try to seek this Purnatvam, the way you have been seeking, you have been on a completely wrong track, you cannot find it. So there are two types of accomplishments that we talked about. Accomplishing of the unaccomplished and accomplishing of the accomplished. All of the artha, kamaha and dharma pursuits are like accomplishing of the unaccomplished. And therefore action is needed, karma is needed in order to accomplish that. But then Vedanta points out that this moksha pursuit is accomplishing of the accomplished. Praptasya praptihi. This moksha, being my very nature, being my very nature is already accomplished. But the only reason it appears to be unaccomplished is because of my ignorance. And therefore, ignorance is the root cause of the problem. The very search for accomplishing this is rooted in ignorance. And this search can never fructify. It is like sugar looking for sweetness. It's like fire looking for heat. The 10th man looking for the 10th man. So Vedanta diagnoses the problem for this person. And we said, what is the importance of diagnosing the root cause? Said it's extremely important to diagnose the root cause when we are facing any problem. Otherwise, we might just be trying to address symptoms, and the problem will keep reappearing in different shapes and forms. So this jiva has not diagnosed the root cause as being ignorance. Now, we looked at all of these 7 stages, if you recall. Ajnanam is the first stage. With ajnanam, ignorance leads to a certain covering, avritihi. Covering of what? Covering of a fact. The fact that the 10th man was already the 10th man. Or the fact that the jiva is already purnaha. This is covered by the ajnanam. First stage is ajnanam. Second stage is this covering of the fact. And what does this covering of the fact lead to? It leads to vikshepaha. Vikshepaha, meaning this person then takes the 10th man to be missing and goes in search of the 10th man. Similarly, the jiva takes the purnatvam to be missing. Says, I am apurna. And then goes in search of purnatvam. And then in this stage only this helplessness, anger, frustration, depression happens. Because this search is fruitless, it causes a lot of struggle. So the 10th man gets frustrated. The jiva also gets frustrated. And then finally the 10th man meets the passerby. The passerby tells him that the 10th man is amidst us. Right now, here. So this is parokshadhihi. At this point, the 10th man gains indirect knowledge. He has a certain shraddha in the words of these passerby, willing to give him some benefit of doubt, because it is clear that the passerby has nothing to gain. He has no axe to grind, as they say. And similarly, this 10th man has nothing to lose by listening to him, because he has tried everything. Similarly, in case of the jiva, Vedanta tells him, the Guru tells him that this Purnam Brahma is there. This Purnatvam is there. And if you know this, then all of your troubles will end. So at this point, he gains parokshadhi. indirect knowledge. He has a certain shraddha in the words of Guru and words of Vedanta. And subsequently, this passerby shows the 10th man how he is the 10th man. Because until then, the 10th man was still asking, where is the 10th man? So this person, this passerby shows him that you are the 10th man. You forgot to count yourself. Similarly, Vedanta also teaches this student that you are that very Brahman that you are seeking. Tat Tvamasi. At this point, the 10th man recognizes that I am the very 10th man I am seeking. What happens to all of his troubles? They evaporate. Similarly, the Jiva recognizes at this point that I am the very Brahman that Vedanta has been talking about. And when the Jiva recognizes this, it is aparoksha jnanam, aparoksha matihi, direct knowledge. And this direct knowledge brings an end to all of this struggle and strife, helplessness, anger, frustration, depression, all of the troubles of samsara. That's why the 6th stage is called Shoka Moksha, freedom from sorrow. And the 7th stage is Triptihi Nirankusha, limitless fulfillment, and that is what we have been calling Purnatvam. So then we saw how does this ignorance cause samsara? In fact, we already outlined it, but we looked at it in a little more detail. We took the example of the rope and the snake. In broad daylight, nobody mistakes the rope for a snake. In complete darkness also, nobody can mistake the rope for the snake. The problem happens only in twilight, when the rope is partially visible as something is there, but the rope is not totally visible as this is a rope. So at that point, one makes a mistake. Inevitably, when somebody doesn't see what a thing is clearly, if that is not known, then the mistake is inevitable. In any field, this happens, like we said. So similarly, we said that I know I am. Even in a totally dark room, if I ask, are you there? I have no doubt. I always say, I am. That means I know I exist. This is doubtless. I have no doubt about it. I know that I exist. So Samanya Jnanam is there. That this I am is there. That is Samanya Jnanam. But the Vishesha Jnanam of who I am, this is missing. Therefore, the mistake is inevitable. A superimposition happens. Just like the rope is mistaken for the snake, this I am, there are other things that get superimposed on this I am. So the attributes of the body and the mind start to get superimposed on this I am. And I start to say, I am tall, I am short, I am dark, I am fair, I am happy, I am sad, I am depressed. So all of this superimposition begins to happen. And then I say, I am Apurnaha. So this I am Apurnaha is a superimposition on the I am. But I don't realize it because I have not studied what Vedanta has to say about it. So I take this, just like this ignorant person takes the rope to be a snake, I take this I am Apurnaha to be the reality. And then what happens? I don't feel comfortable being Apurnaha. This Apurnatvam is not acceptable to me. I am not acceptable to myself, and therefore I want to make myself acceptable to myself. And then I get into this business of trying to remove this Apurnatvam through these various pursuits of Artha, Kamaha, and Dharma. But these various pursuits leave my Apurnatvam untouched. Why? Because they are not opposed to the ignorance. They cannot destroy ignorance. Like we said, beating the snake with the stick will never lead me to the realization that this is not a snake at all. Because his action is a product of ignorance. Similarly, all of these pursuits are a product of ignorance. They are not opposed to ignorance. They cannot destroy this ignorance. And therefore, this ignorance continues, the superimposition continues, and the samsara continues. We took this example of a broomstick being decorated. It is ridiculous to try to decorate a broomstick with something, hoping that it will become something else. The broomstick remains a broomstick. Similarly, in my own vision, I am limited, I am apurnaha. The problem is with my vision. And in my own vision, I am like this broomstick, I am apurnaha. And then I am trying to decorate myself with various accomplishments. None of these decorations change my vision. Fundamentally, I continue to say, I am apurnaha. So this samsara never ends. Like we said, Pujya Swamiji said, what you lack is not the problem. That you lack is the problem. What you lack, if I define the problem to be what I lack and I try to gain what I lack, that's trying to solve the wrong problem. It can never address the root cause of the real problem. The real problem is that I lack when I should not be lacking at all. I am purnaha, but I think that I lack. And that problem is not addressed by these pursuits. So there is a need for an entirely different pursuit to address this problem. And this only a mature person can discover. So this ignorance, like we said, doesn't go by itself. We said there are two ignorances. One is born with ignorance of the world and ignorance of the self. The world ignorance I keep on shedding as I get quote unquote educated about the world. As I get educated about the world, I drop this world ignorance. But this self-ignorance remains intact because the solutions to this world ignorance, physics knowledge can only address physics ignorance. Chemistry knowledge can only address chemistry ignorance. They cannot address this problem of self-ignorance. And that is why we said that towering intellects in the field of modern science or anywhere you take, they may be towering intellects in terms of their knowledge of the world, but they may remain totally self-ignorant because their self-ignorance has not been touched, has not been impacted, has not been uprooted by any of this thing that they have learned. That is why the Shvetashvatara Upanishad says, Yada charmavad akasham veshtayishyanti manavaha tada devam avijnaya dukkhasyanto bhavishyati. Says that I give you one condition in which you can gain dukkhasyantaha, meaning end of sorrow, end of samsaraha. I'll give you one condition. When you can gain dukkhasyantaha, devam avijnaya, without self-knowledge. There's only one way in which you can end samsara. Yada charmavad akasham veshtayishyanti manavaha. If the human beings are able to roll up the space, the sky like a carpet. So the Upanishad is telling me it is impossible. And therefore we say this mumukshuhu has to mandatorily become a jigyasuhu. That is why this pursuit of knowledge is the key thing here. It's an entirely different pursuit. And until this mumukshuhu becomes a jigyasuhu, if this mumukshuhu seeker of moksha doesn't turn into a seeker of knowledge, then this mumukshuhu will try to seek moksha through various other means, everything other than knowledge. It is still like the 10th man looking for the 10th man. The mumukshuhu may get into another, this mumukshuhu may get into another kind of samsara, a spiritual samsara, where the mumukshuhu thinks that if I gain a particular experience, one day I will gain moksha. And that day never arrives. Or if supposedly, hypothetically, let's say that one day that day arrives and he says, yes, I have gained this moksha that I have been looking for. If that day arrives, then we say that moksha that is gained in time will also be lost in time. Because we say this real recognition is that if at all one gains moksha, it can only be through knowledge that I already have this moksha. I have always had this moksha that I was looking for. That can only be the real moksha. A moksha that is never really gained. It is only as though gained. How is it as though gained? Just like the 10th man as though gained the 10th man. How? Through knowledge that I was always the 10th man. So we say that this mumukshu who has to mandatorily become a jigyasu, a seeker of knowledge, a seeker of self-knowledge. But then this raises the question about how do I gain this self-knowledge? That is the next logical question. This person has become a jigyasu. So earlier when this person had asked, how do I gain moksha? We said that is an invalid question. Why? Because moksha is your very nature. But this, how do I gain knowledge? It's a very valid question. Because that is the route to gain moksha. So this question Vedanta does not dismiss. In fact, Vedanta congratulates somebody who is asking this question because it is now clear that the mumukshu has become a jigyasuhu. Because only a jigyasuhu will ask this question, how do I gain this knowledge? So in order to answer this question, we need to do a fundamental inquiry into what knowledge is. And that is what we propose to do in the next few classes. We will take up questions like what is knowledge? And what are the various means of gaining knowledge? And some of this we are already familiar with, but some of this we have not really thought about. And therefore, this inquiry helps dismiss funny ideas one may have about self-knowledge. Because people tend to associate a lot of mysticism with things. So some of this inquiry actually demystifies what self-knowledge is. So what is knowledge? What are the various means? What are the various means for gaining any knowledge? And then which of those means can really be applied to self-knowledge? Finally, what is the means of self-knowledge? So these are the questions we'll be dwelling upon. So let us get to the first question. What is knowledge? So let us take the example of a pot. So I turn my head and let's say I'm in a shop somewhere. There are various artifacts there, various products on display there, and I'm just looking around. And suddenly I come in contact. I turn my eyes towards this thing and I say, this is a pot. Now, what exactly happens here? So some of this we will be studying, although we are not ready yet to study it in total detail about how Vedanta explains what happens here. We'll be looking at some of this. So one important thing is that this pot is an inert material entity. The pot cannot make itself known to me unless my eyes come in contact with the pot. See, if I close my eyes and I look in that direction, then nothing happens. I just see the same blankness that I was seeing here. The moment I open my eyes, this pot, I say this is a pot and I know the pot. So this pot cannot make itself known to me. There has to be a sentient being for knowledge to take place. And this sentient being has to apply a certain sense organ that has to come in contact with the sense object for the knowledge to take place. So what happens when I use my eyes is that a modification of the mind takes place. The mind takes a form of the pot. This is what is called ghatakara vrittihi. Vrittihi means a modification of the mind. So ghatakara vrittihi takes place, which means the mind takes the form of the pot. And two things happen when the mind takes the form of the pot. One is that this pot ignorance goes. So when I was earlier looking at the pot with my closed eyes, I did not know what was there. Whatever was there was covered by ignorance. But then when I open my eyes and it comes in contact with the pot, then this pot ignorance goes. And I say, this is a pot. The mind takes the form of the pot. And I say, this is a pot. And then the pot ignorance goes, the pot shines in my consciousness. These two things happen. Vishaya avarana nivrittihi, this is called. The pot ignorance, the covering goes. You see, he said ignorance causes covering. So this covering goes. Vishaya avarana nivrittihi. This happens. And then Vishaya prakashaha, this object shines in my consciousness. So these two things happen. And I say, I know the pot. So I have pot knowledge. So the knowledge arises when there is a modification of the mind in the form of an object. The modification of the mind in the form of the object is crucial. Without that modification, the knowledge cannot happen. So one thing we say is that all knowledge takes place in the mind only. People use this phrase called intellectual knowledge. They say all this we are talking about is only intellectual knowledge. As if there was some other knowledge which takes place outside the intellect. Pujya Swamiji points this out, that we should avoid using unnecessary adjectives because they cause confusion. And suppose Pujya Swamiji gives this example of a good sadhu, for example. Hey, sadhu is good. What do they need to call somebody a good sadhu? The sadhu himself is a good person. There is no need to affix this adjective saying good sadhu. This is another example that is given elsewhere. Yellow turmeric. Turmeric is always yellow. So it is unnecessary to prefix this adjective called yellow turmeric. So similarly, the intellectual knowledge, intellectual is an unnecessary adjective. You would need an adjective called yellow turmeric if there was a red turmeric or a brown turmeric. Then you need to say yellow turmeric. But turmeric is always yellow. There's no need to say yellow turmeric. If you tell somebody yellow turmeric, he may only get confused and think that maybe there is some other kind of turmeric. So similarly, if there was some dental knowledge or spinal knowledge or skeletal knowledge, then it makes sense to say intellectual knowledge. But when all knowledge takes place in the intellect only, we say that this intellectual adjective is unnecessary. That's why we will just use the phrase knowledge. So the knowledge arises when there's a modification of the mind in the form of an object. And in this sense, the knowledge, jnanam, is actually a fairly general term. It doesn't have to be for valid knowledge only. It may even be used for an illusion. Seeing the rope as a snake is also jnanam. It happens to be invalid jnanam, but it is still jnanam, invalid knowledge. Or having a doubt, like, is this a snake or a rope? Is a doubt. Even a doubt comes under the general category of this, broad category of jnanam only. Or a recollection that yesterday I saw a rope. A recollection, smritihi. Even this generally comes under jnanam in the loose sense of the term. So now, what is valid knowledge? Let us look into this a bit. So Vedanta uses this phrase called prama for valid knowledge to distinguish it from this broad sense of the term jnanam. So valid knowledge is called prama. Invalid knowledge is called aprama. So all of these terms come from this dhatuhu, this root in Sanskrit called ma. So ma is the root. And from this root, as we have seen, that is in Sanskritam, all the shabdas, all the words are formed from dhatus, from roots. So this ma dhatu, all of those roots indicate an action. So the ma dhatu means to measure. It conveys the idea of this action of measuring something. And that is why we have this word called mapaka. Mapaka means a measuring instrument. A measuring instrument is called mapaka. It comes from this root ma. So similarly, this word prama comes from this root ma. And there is a prefix pra that is affixed to it. Prama means something that it is valid knowledge. You can say it has been measured, something that measures very well. Pra indicates something that is done well. Right? So this measuring done very well, prama, means valid knowledge. So this branch of knowledge, that this branch of inquiry into knowledge is called epistemology. Epistemology. So all of this we are talking about comes under this epistemology topic. So there is a certain definition that Vedanta gives for what Brahma is. There's this text called Vedanta Paribhasha, and that gets into a lot of this epistemology of Vedanta. Means what is knowledge according to Vedanta? What are the means of knowledge? What is valid knowledge? What is invalid knowledge? All of this discussion happens in this text, Vedanta Paribhasha. So Vedanta Paribhasha defines Prama as Pramatvam Abadhitartha Vishayaka Jnanatvam. Pramatvam Abadhitartha Vishayaka Jnanatvam. Abadhita, it uses this important word called abadhita. So what does this mean? So abadhita means uncontradicted, something that is not negated. This is a criteria for valid knowledge. So what is badhita? Let us look at that first. What is contradicted? What is negated? So when a rope is seen as a snake, then that knowledge is negated later by through closer examination, through a closer inquiry. If I saw this snake, right, a screaming snake, snake, and then somebody brought a torch and looked at that, he said it is not a snake, it is a rope. Then seeing the rope as a rope is prama. But what I saw earlier, the rope as a snake, that becomes aprama. Why? Because it was contradicted, negated by subsequent investigation, subsequent inquiry. So this seeing the rope as a snake is badhita. It is contradicted, negated. There is another word used that is called sublated. So all of these words mean the same thing. So this rope as snake is badhita. But later on, when through closer examination, I find this is actually a rope, that is abadhita. Because it is not contradicted by anything else later. So abadhitatha vishayaka jnanatvam. So this is the primary criteria for what is prama, that knowledge which is not contradicted, not negated. Then this brings up a question about what happens if I recollect a certain knowledge. Like I said, I saw a rope yesterday on my fence. So I am recollecting something that I saw. Now I might have seen a snake on the fence also, because I mistook the rope for the fence, for the snake. Or I might have seen a rope as a rope, and I am recollecting that. So this smritihi, a recollection, may be valid or invalid. It depends on the validity or invalidity of the original cognition. If originally what I saw, if it was really a snake, it would be abadhitaha. The cognition would be abadhitaha. And similarly, if I had seen a rope as a snake, that original cognition would be badhitaha. But if I had seen a rope as a rope, the original cognition would be abadhitaha. So the smriti is as good as the original cognition. Whatever I am recalling, if the original is valid, the recollection is valid. If the original was invalid, the recollection is also invalid. But then, smriti is never a means for new knowledge. Through recollection, I cannot gain any new knowledge. I can only recall something that I had cognized earlier, something I had known earlier, through some other means. And that earlier cognition was gained through some other means, not by recollection. So we say that recollection, smritihi, is never a means for new knowledge. So since our focus here, the whole reason we are having this discussion is how do I gain self-knowledge? That is the context in which we are discussing all this. And we're discussing what is the means for any knowledge. So in that context, we have to exclude recollection, because recollection is never a means for new knowledge. So there is another adjective that gets added called anadhigata. Adhigata means known, already known. Anadhigata means that which is not already known. So this prama definition excludes that which is already known also. So there are now two adjectives for what is considered to be prama. First of all, it should be uncontradicted. unnegated, abadhita. And the second is, it should not be something that is already known, anadhika. So, pramatvam anadhigata badhitartha vishayaka jnanatvam. This is what Vedanta Paribhasha says. Anadhigata abadhita jnanam. This is prama. That which is not already known and that which is uncontradicted. So now we get into the question of what are the means for knowledge. What are the various means for knowledge? Like we said, my sense of vision, my sense organ of vision is one of the means of knowledge clearly, because it helps me gain the knowledge of colors and forms also. So what are the different means? So like we said, that every effect always has a cause. There can be no effect without a cause. We have already seen this principle earlier. Anything that, an event that happens, there is always a cause for it. So if knowledge happens, if knowledge takes place in my mind, which means a modification of the mind happens, there should be a cause for it. So now what is the cause for this modification of the mind? That is the question. So there is a certain consideration here that when anything happens, an effect happens, there need not be one cause. There can be multiple causes that come together for the effect to happen. So these causes are classified into two categories. Sadharana karanam and asadharana karanam. Sadharana karanam means there are a multitude of causes that come together that are supporting causes that lead to this particular event. But then there is an asadharana karanam, means something that is a distinguished cause, that is clearly separable from these other supporting causes that lead to that particular event. So this asadharana karanam is given a special name. It is called karanam, an instrument. Karanam. Let us take the example of cooking, for example. When I'm cooking something, there are a variety of things that I have to do. I have to cut the vegetables, right? I have to bring a bowl, a cooking bowl. I have to keep it on the burner. I have to cut the vegetables. I have to put the vegetables into that bowl. I have to add some water. I have to add salt. I have to add turmeric. So all of these things are required for that cooking to happen. But then there is a distinguished cause, asadharana karanam, which is fire. I have to start the fire. So all of these causes come together for that cooking to happen. The distinguished cause is fire, because in the absence of that fire, which is very unique, nothing can happen. So similarly, for this modification of the mind, prama, to take place, there are many causes that are sadharana karanam. For example, I have to be breathing. I have to be a living individual. I have to be breathing, right? If my breath stopped one month ago or 1 week ago, then this modification cannot take place. There has to be circulation of blood in the body. Similarly, the mind has to be functional. So all of this is important. But for this particular modification of the form to take place, I have to use my sense organ of vision. That is the asadharana karanam. So in case of this vision knowledge of colors, these eyes are called asadharana karanam. Asadharanam karanam is karanam. So these eyes become the karanam. So the karanam for prama, the asadharana karanam for prama is given a special name. Prama karanam pramanam. So this prama karanam, the asadharana karanam for prama is called pramanam. So eyes are the pramanam, the sense organ of vision are the pramanam for color prama. For color knowledge to take place, the sense organ of vision is the asadharana karana. The mind is also a karanam, because without the mind also this knowledge it cannot take place. That is clear. Without the mind also it cannot take place. But the mind is involved in all cognitions. It is involved in the cognition of hearing also. It is involved in the cognition of touch also. So it is not the asadharana karanam. It is a sadharana karanam. It is an important karanam, no doubt, but it is there in all of the other cognitions also. What is unique to color cognition is the sense organ of vision. And no other instrument can provide this color knowledge. Only the sense organ of vision can provide this color knowledge. Similarly, the sense organ of hearing is the pramanam for sound knowledge of sounds. The sense organ of touch is the pramanam for knowledge of touches, for knowledge of textures. So now we see that there are these 4 factors that are involved in any cognition. Say there are 4 factors. We have already discussed 2 of them. One is called prama. The second one is pramanam. Prama is a modification that happens in the mind, and pramanam is the asadharana karanam for this prama karanam, pramanam. And it is also called the means of knowledge. If we were to translate it into English, pramanam translates as means of knowledge. So there is prama, the modification of the mind. And then there is pramanam, the asadharana karana. And then there is the object whose form the mind takes. We say the modification of the mind in the form of the object is what gives rise to the knowledge. So there is this object. The object is called prameyam. Prameyam. So if you see in all of these, the ma dhatu is coming in. Prama, pramanam, prameyam. And then the 4th factor is the knower. The knower is called pramata. Pramata. So what happens is that the knower, pramata, employs a means of knowledge called pramanam. And the means of knowledge contacts the object called prameyam. And it gives rise to the modification of the mind in the form of the object that is called prama. So now we have to make this observation that when I open my eyes and my eyes come in contact with the object, then the knowledge takes place. The prama takes place. I don't have to will anything in this. It's a very important concept. Then my will is not involved in this. So based on this observation, this is extended to all kinds of knowledge. This principle is extended to all kinds of knowledge. So based on this, we formulate what is known as the three principles of knowledge. Three knowledge principles. Something that describes something fundamental about knowledge and how it rises. So it is important to understand this, and therefore we will get into what is known as what we are calling the three principles of knowledge, or the three knowledge principles. So what is the first knowledge principle? It is this, that when an appropriate and adequate pramanam comes in contact with a prameya, an object of knowledge, then this modification of the mind in the form of the object, prama, takes place in the pramata, the knower. This is the first knowledge principle. When a pramanam, the means of knowledge, comes in contact with the prameya, the object of knowledge, then a modification of the mind takes place in the form of the object called prama. This modification takes place in the pramata. Note that takes place, the phrase takes place. This indicates that this whole process is spontaneous. There is no additional will required in this process. So we use two adjectives here. One is called appropriate and the other is adequate. When an appropriate and adequate means comes in contact with the object, what do these two mean? So appropriate means that if I have to gain the knowledge of colors, for example, we saw that I saw this pot, or I want to see a certain pot and what its color is. I have to use my sense organ of vision. I cannot insist that I will use my sense organ of hearing and somehow gain color knowledge. That is impossible. That is why an appropriate pramana has to be used in keeping with the object whose knowledge I want to gain. See, all of this is extremely important for self-knowledge. That is why we are dwelling on this in detail, because eventually we say we have to answer the question, what is an appropriate and adequate pramana for self-knowledge? But we are trying to understand this in the context of general knowledge first. So the appropriate pramana has to be used. The second thing is that the pramana has to be adequate. Adequate meaning that there has to be no obstruction in this working. For example, if my eyes are cataracted and I look at a certain conch, the conch is really speaking white in color, but I see it as yellow because of this cataract. Why? Why does the prama not take place? The prama should have been, it's a white conch, but I see it as a yellow conch. Even though the appropriate pramana is aligned with the prameya, the prama does not take place because there is an obstruction. The pramana is inadequate. Similarly, in case of the rope snake, in twilight, even though an appropriate pramana was aligned with the prameya, the prama did not take place. I saw a snake because the light was inadequate. So if somehow erroneous or doubtful knowledge arises, that is because the pramana was either not appropriate or not adequate. So if the appropriate pramana is used, and if any inadequacy is removed, for example, that same rope is seen again in broad daylight, the inadequacy is removed, then the knowledge takes place. Again, no application of will is required. I just have to correct that the issues that caused the rise of wrong knowledge. So we have to see that this application of will is not required. Now, the other part, that if my pramana, even against my will, suppose I will not to see something, right? I don't want to see something because I consider it inauspicious, for example. In fact, the Vichara Sagara gives this example of the moon on Chaturthi. See, seeing the moon on Chaturthi is considered to be inauspicious. So this person realizes that today is Chaturthi. There is this phrase that is used, Chaturthyam Chandro na drashtavyaha. Chaturthyam Chandro na drashtavyaha. On Chaturthi, don't see the moon, it says. So this person follows this rule. So he says, today I will not see the moon. And he walks in the evening. And invariably it happens, and when one decides not to see it, one actually somehow sees it, you see. So when somehow accidentally the eyes turn towards the moon, and then the moon knowledge takes place. And this person says, oh, I thought I should not see it. So this alignment of the pramana with the prameya, this condition is so powerful that if the pramana is adequate and if it is appropriate, knowledge takes place even if I will not to. Knowledge has to take place. This is the law. So the corollary of this is that valid knowledge cannot take place without employing an adequate and appropriate pramana. So Krishna, you have a question?
Yes, sorry to interrupt,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I thought it might be pertinent to get this clarified before we go further.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that this Brahma happens without the application of will. And if can we also infer that if it is without the application of will, it is also happening without the application of mind? The reason why I'm asking this is, if it is going to happen automatically without the application of mind or will, whatever, each person has a different faculty of processing things, right? So if it happens automatically, can this Brahma happen despite the person's faculty?
There is a certain distinguishing of the general function of the mind from the application of will. See, the application of the will involves a certain resolve, right? That is also a function of the mind. It is a certain resolve that I want to do this. And then one embarks on an action. And that is what we call a will, an action that originates out of the will of the person. That one may do a certain thing. Today I decide that I want to go to a certain temple, for example, right? So that action originates from my will, right? But in this case, when this person has actually willed, I don't want to see the moon, right? So that is also, you can say, it is a certain will that I don't want to see the moon, right? So in spite of that, if his eyes turn towards the moon, the knowledge takes place. Whether he wills it or he doesn't will it, it doesn't matter. It is immaterial. There is a certain will involved in aligning the pramana with the prameya. For example, I may be desirous of reading a book. So there is a certain will that I want to read this book and what it says in this particular paragraph. So there is a certain will involved, and I open the book to that particular para and I direct my sense organ of vision to it. Okay. Up to that point, will is involved, right? But after that, the first word, my mind takes the form of it. When the knowledge takes place, at that point, the will is suspended. The will is not involved in the process of the knowledge rising. The function of the mind is still involved. The mind is a sadharana karanam. Without the mind, the knowledge cannot take place. But the will is suspended at that point when the knowledge is taking place. And even if the will is not suspended, even if the will wishes against it, that the knowledge should not happen, if the pramana is aligned with the prameya, the knowledge has to take place. So, this is the first principle of knowledge. And they will continue this inquiry. And there are more things, interesting things to be discussed here, which we'll take up in the next class. And we'll have maybe a little bit of time for some comments and questions. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. So any comments or questions on what we discussed today?
Okay, just one rider on top of the question I asked.
Yeah.
So I think I got confused with this automatic knowledge. There's knowledge happening, this Brahma happening automatically without my will, without my ability to receive this Brahma. So that's where I was asking, even if I am an idiot, rank idiot, will this Brahma still happen in me, despite I not having that faculty to receive that wisdom? See, I mean, each of us process information differently.
No, that part is definitely, there is, like we have said, that a certain preparedness of the mind is required. Certain qualifications, additional qualifications are required for a specific knowledge. See, yes, in this person, self-knowledge may not take place, right? But if this person aligns his sense of vision with a yellow pot, that knowledge will still take place, right? And there is a certain spontaneity to that knowledge. So there are certain qualifications for specific knowledge to happen, right? For example, if his eyes are cataracted, right? If his eyes are cataracted, but his ears are functioning very well, then this person may not be able to gain accurate knowledge of colors. He is not qualified for color knowledge, right? But he is very qualified for sound knowledge. So similarly, based on the knowledge that one is targeting, one may or may not have certain qualifications. But if those qualifications are gained in terms of the cataract being removed, then if the pramana is aligned with the prameya, then the knowledge has to take place.
Understood. Clear. Thank you. Thanks.
Is prama and vritti the same?
Yes. The vritti is a modification of the mind.
Modification of the mind. Yeah. Same happens when the prama happens.
So yes, a prama is a vritti, but every vritti is not a prama. Because you may see a rope as a snake. There is a modification of the mind in the form of a snake. So that is still a vritti, but not prama. So every prama is a vritti, but every vritti is not a prama.
Okay.
So did that answer the question, Rama?
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you.
So you see, why one of the reasons why this entire discussion becomes very important is that we have not applied the right means of knowledge to know ourselves. In fact, we have not even known what the right means of knowledge to know who I am is. So I tend to apply all those local means of knowledge that I have, which I use for knowing colors of pots, etc. Right? I tend to apply inappropriate means of knowledge in order to know myself. And that is what causes a wrong conclusion about who I am. And this wrong conclusion is what results in this whole problem of samsara. Srinivas, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so Hariom, so I think one of the other aspects, like there are four aspects, right? You said Prameya, Pramanam, Prama, and Pramata. So the Pramata here is also very important. I mean, like this is the adhikari that we talked about in the earlier, right? So that the right adhikari is suitable for gaining that knowledge, provided Pramanam is right and the Prameya appears in the right context and so on, right? So yeah, so when you say adequate and appropriate, we are talking both of the pramanam and the pramata. Yeah.
So
that's what
pramanam and that is right. There is a certain qualifications. In fact, in this context, we were talking about the pramanam, right? The lack of qualification, would come under a certain obstruction. Like there is inadequate light, for example, or a cataracted eye, right? The cataract is an obstruction in some sense, right? So the cataract is an obstruction that makes the pramana operation inadequate. Cataract is an obstruction that makes the pramana operation inadequate. When the cataract is removed, the pramana operation is perfect. So similarly, the lack of qualification and all that will come under an obstruction that obstructs the proper functioning of the pramana.
So the question, I think this goes back to what Sri Krishna ji was talking about and asking. So when we say, sometimes we say eyes wide shut, he is in the classroom with eyes. So in the sense that the eyes are fully functioning, not cataracted, but the focus is not, right? So because of course this goes into deeper aspects of the philosophy, but since eyes being jada, the eyes are functioning as if they're wide open and they can take any light in and get knowledge of whatever light it falls on, the light falls on, right? But you as the adhikari or the pramata is sleeping as in brain is shut or mind is shut, like what he was referring to.
But it doesn't have to be mind shut, retro. So you could also be like a baby. You're seeing a fruit but you don't know what it is. Your eyes are perfectly fine. You're seeing a fruit, but somebody has to tell you it is an apple, right? It's both. Either your mind is not functioning or you don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's where
So the mind comes under the definitely a karanam for cognition. It is just not classified as a sadharana karanam. It is a sadharana karanam that has to be behind all the cognitions. So behind the cognition of sounds, behind the cognition of colors, the mind has to be there. So if the mind is preoccupied with something else, like you said, right, then that is also an obstruction to the functioning of the pramana.
Okay.
It is like an obstruction. Similarly, in order to gain a certain knowledge, there has to be a certain preparation of the mind. For example, if somebody goes to an 8th standard student goes to a physics class where he's teaching E is equal to mc squared, the lack of preparation is an obstruction. The physics teacher is teaching everything that is required to understand E is equal to mc squared. There are other students sitting in the class who get it. But this person is like the baby that Rama talked about. He doesn't have the preparation to understand what is being presented to him. So he doesn't gain that knowledge. The lack of preparation is an obstruction. If the same person gained the preparation and sat in the same class, then the E is equal to mc squared knowledge would take place. So similarly, there is a certain, in the example of the baby also, there are certain preparation of the mind that is missing, certain samskaras are missing. Those have to be there as well. But we say that those are true for any cognition. Hence, it's a sadharana karanam. It has to be a prerequisite, but not this asadharana karanam. Yeah, you Vishwanathan, you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah. So far, what we have learned is two kind of knowledge. One is the worldly knowledge, and second, the self-knowledge. These are all the two aspects which are criteria for mumukshu, jignasu we have discussed so far. My question is, to attain self-knowledge, can we undo worldly knowledge, or we need to learn first worldly knowledge and come to realize the self-knowledge? How does it work? Is there any relation between these two?
Some amount of worldly knowledge is required. In case of anadhikaris, for example, like we said, you have to go through a lot of struggle with artha, kama, and dharma and all that before one comes to the maturity where one becomes a mumukshuhu and a jigyasuhu. Also, one has to struggle with day-to-day life before one comes to this. And for that, one has to go and gain whatever worldly knowledge is required in order to know this worldly knowledge is not leading me to my purnatvam. When one is totally a baby and growing up, right, one cannot go and directly teach this baby self-knowledge because the preparation, the mumukshutvam is not there, the jigyasutvam is not there. How does it come? Only when the baby learns a lot of things and struggles and finds out this is not leading me there. There are certain exceptions to this. If all of this work has been done in prior janmas, for example,
I was able to ask
then there are prodigies. In fact, Upanishad gives an example of a rishi called Vamadeva. Now, Vamadeva had a certain prarabdha that had to be worked out. So he was in the womb. And in the womb, he gained self-knowledge because he had already done all of the work in the prior janmas.
Yes.
And in this, just some minor obstruction had to be removed. And that happened in the womb itself. So this person became a jnani, a jnananishtha in the womb itself. Similarly, we come across examples, not just in terms of self-knowledge, but in laukika things also. For example, recently there is this videos of this child who is playing the violin so beautifully going around. I don't know if some of you saw that, right? It's just amazing that she must hardly be like 6, 7 years old or something, and playing violin so beautifully. And we have various worldly examples of geniuses and prodigies, right? So if the work has been done in prior janmas and that gets carried over, then in this janma one can become a prodigy in worldly matters also, and even in spiritual matters.
Understood. And because many acharyas from Sringeri Parampara and then Ramana Maharishi, these are the two examples which I can think of.
Yeah, definitely.
So
right.
They don't require to undergo the worldly knowledge before come to the self-knowledge.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Another question. Can this Brahma happen without Karanam at all?
No, basically we say that Brahma, right? Brahma can only arise through the application of a pramanam. This, it's very clear. One cannot just get some prama without the application of a means of knowledge. There are some exceptions to this, like we said, in case this pramanam was already used in a prior janma, for example, and if that prama is getting carried over, right, it would still be a smritihi. It would be a recollection of the valid prama. That can happen in this janma without application of a pramana, for example. But if you want to gain new knowledge, a pramanam is absolutely essential, and that is why we are having this entire discussion.
The question is because many of our karanams are limited. For example, our sight is limited only to 3 colors, our hearing is limited only to a specific spectrum. So much of our karanam is anyway limited, but what is out there is not limited. So
Exactly.
if I have to receive it with my limited set of karanams that I have, then I'm doomed forever to be, limited in my pramanam itself. Whereas if I have to receive the ultimate reality, somewhere I have to go beyond the limitations of my karanam. That was why I was asking. And also in your definition, there is no karanam involved.
So that's a very valid question. And in fact, the question that a jigyasu should also be asking, that's a very valid question. And this is exactly what the development is going to be. We will see what is the pramanam for self-knowledge. So that we will see in subsequent classes. So, but to get to that background, to get to that point, we need this background to come to that point.
Okay. Thank you.
So we are already past our time. So shall we conclude then?
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay. Hari Om.
Hari Om. Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om. Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Thank you.
Hari Om.